Tuvalu blows everyone away with 27.1% of its budget going toward healthcare. Let's see where they rank and what's behind this eye-popping figure. Okay, let that sink in. 27.1% of your hard-earned cash is going straight into healthcare costs. That's a big chunk of change, and it's not just about paying bills, it's about making tough decisions on what you can afford to prioritize. Think about all the other things you could be spending that money on, saving for retirement, paying off debt, or even just enjoying a night out with friends. Here's what gets me. Nauru's healthcare spending is actually higher than I expected at 18.2% of their GDP. That's still a long way from Tuvalu's 27.1%, but it shows us that there are other countries in the Pacific region that are prioritizing healthcare, and we should take note. The U.S. is spending 16.7% of its GDP on healthcare. That's a significant chunk of change. But here's what gets me. It's still a far cry from Tuvalu's astronomical 27.1%, and we're not even close to the top yet. Now we're getting somewhere. Afghanistan's healthcare spending is actually pretty reasonable at 15% of its GDP. That's still a significant chunk, but it shows that even countries with some of the most pressing needs can manage to allocate a decent amount of resources towards healthcare. The Marshall Islands are actually doing pretty well healthcare spending. They're at 13.4% of their GDP. That's still a ways off from Tuvalu's 27.1%, but it shows that even some of these smaller nations are prioritizing healthcare, and that's an interesting trend to keep in mind as we see where the numbers take us next. Now we're getting somewhere. Liberia's healthcare spend of 13% might seem low, but let that sink in. It's actually one of the higher numbers on this list. We've got a long way to go before we reach Tuvalu's 27.1%, but every step up is a sign that these countries are prioritizing their citizens' health. You're looking at a chart that's got some surprises. The overall trend here is actually pretty flat. No huge spikes or drops. But if you zoom in, you'll see that there are a few countries that stand out from the pack. Let's start with the top of the list. Tuvalu takes the cake, spending an astonishing 27.1% of its GDP on healthcare. That's a lot of medical bills. Let's look at the numbers. Now we're back to Tuvalu, and I have to say, this one still holds up as a real outlier. 27.1% of their budget goes straight into healthcare. That's amount, especially when you consider some other countries are barely scraping by with less than half that. You know, when we look at these numbers, one thing that jumps out is just how much some countries are willing to spend on healthcare. Take Tuvalu, for example. They're shelling out 27.1% of their budget on medical care. That's a big chunk of change. Now, I'm not saying it's the right amount or the wrong amount, but what it does tell us is that these countries are prioritizing healthcare in a way that we might not be. And that makes you think twice about your own priorities. Are you putting enough money aside for medical emergencies? Tuvalu's got 27.1% of its GDP going towards healthcare. Nauru's not far behind with 18.2%. And then there's the United States, which is still a pretty hefty 16.7%. Now, keep in mind, these numbers are based on some assumptions about what counts as healthcare spending. It's not always clear-cut. Markets don't move in straight lines. Real life gets messy. You know what they say, you're what you spend on. Well, it looks like some countries are spending big time on healthcare. I mean, we're talking percentages here, and these numbers might just surprise you. Tuvalu's got 27.1% of its budget going towards healthcare, while the U.S. is at a relatively modest 16.7%. That's the math nobody shows you. Now, if you want to see more of this kind of math, subscribe to The Numbers.